Hi everyone, I'm Andy, and this is the AI Breakdown. Welcome to your weekly news edition, where I'll cover what happened in AI last week and why it matters. So, about the NVIDIA story we mentioned last week. We've seen its full shape now, and it's more than a chip launch. GTC 2026 was NVIDIA showing its hand as a full-stack AI company. Not just GPUs and servers, but silicon, systems, inference architecture, and now agent software. The headline hardware is Vera Rubin, featuring the Rubin GPU and Vera CPU, with expected release later this year. It is designed specifically for agentic AI and large-scale data centers, promising up to 10 times higher inference throughput per watt and 4 times faster training compared to the previous Blackwell architecture. CNBC framed this as NVIDIA's evolution beyond the GPU business, and the keynote confirmed that. Jensen Huang raised his demand outlook from $500 billion through 2026 to $1 trillion through 2027. That's either very bold or very Jensen. Likely both. But what stands out most isn't even Vera Rubin on its own. It's what NVIDIA did with Groq, spelled with a Q, which is unrelated to Elon Musk's chatbot Groq, spelled with a K. Late last year, NVIDIA paid $20 billion to license Groq's technology and hire a good chunk of its engineering team. Technically not a full acquisition, Groq still exists as a company, but the talent and IP moved to NVIDIA, and 3 months later, the result showed up on stage, the NVIDIA Groq 3 LPX, a rack built from Groq 3 LPX inference accelerator for AI. Here's why that matters. Running an AI model has 2 phases. The heavy phase, called prefill, is where the model digests your input. The lighter but more time-sensitive phase, decode, is where it generates its response 1 token at a time. GPUs are great at the first part, but they're not for the second. They have huge memory but relatively slow bandwidth. Groq's chip flips that. Tiny memory, massive bandwidth. So NVIDIA's new architecture splits the job. Vera Rubin handles the heavy lifting. Groq handles the fast bit. According to NVIDIA, the combined system delivers up to 35 times higher throughput per megawatt than the previous Blackwell generation alone. Now that's NVIDIA's claim, and it comes with conditions. Real-world numbers will vary, but the direction is clear. Bain put it bluntly in their GTC analysis. Inference, not training, is now driving compute demand, and that makes sense. Training a model is a one-off project. Running it for millions of users, all day, every day, is where the real cost sits. If this architecture genuinely cuts that cost by an order of magnitude, the economics of deploying AI shift significantly. Then there's the physical infrastructure story. NVIDIA previewed a next-generation rack design called Kyber. It uses vertical blade trays instead of horizontal ones, with a mid-plane that replaces miles of internal cabling. The target is 144 GPUs per rack, and here's the spec that should get the attention of anyone in infrastructure planning. The full-scale version of this, due in 2027, will draw around 600 kilowatts per rack. That's 5 times what current systems need. Impressive performance on paper. But 600 kilowatts per rack is where the roadmap meets the electricity grid. NVIDIA also moved up the stack. They launched an open-source agent toolkit with 3 components. NemoClaw, which wraps the open-source OpenClaw agent framework with enterprise security. OpenShell, a runtime that sandboxes what agents can actually do, and AIQ, a blueprint for building research agents. A number of enterprise software partners are already building with it, including Adobe, Salesforce, SAP, ServiceNow and Cisco, so it looks like NVIDIA is aiming to be the default runtime for enterprise agents, much like CUDA became for GPU computing. So what does this add up to? NVIDIA isn't just selling faster chips anymore, they're building an ecosystem for AI operations, silicon, inference architecture, power infrastructure, and now the software layer that sits on top. Now a quick word from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Notify Technology, a health and safety software partner, helping teams run incident management, audits and inspections, and risk assessments in one place. And with Notify Spark, their AI companion, they're streamlining incident reporting and investigations, saving time, reducing admin load, and helping teams act faster on what matters. Learn more at notifytechnology.com. Now onto policy, and this is a narrative that seems dry until you understand it might transform the compliance landscape for almost anyone creating or utilizing AI in the US. Last week, we discussed the FTC's policy statement. This week, the White House took another step by releasing a 4-page framework for national AI legislation. The intent is clear. Congress should overrule state AI laws that impose undue burdens and create one national standard rather than allowing 50 discordant ones. Here's the basic idea. The White House wants Congress to set one national framework instead of leaving companies to deal with a patchwork of state rules. It lays out 7 areas for Congress to handle, including children's safety, infrastructure's community effects, copyright, educating Americans, and developing an AI-ready workforce, and indirect government censorship. But the big point is preemption. Washington would take the lead on AI model regulation, while states would still keep some authority over general child safety, fraud, consumer protection, data center siting, and certain AI purchase decisions in law enforcement and education. From an industry standpoint, this is appealing. For a national business, one rulebook is easier than 50. Legal teams don't want to decipher a map of conflicting chatbot rules by state. The need is also practical as state actions are accelerating. Washington State passed 2 AI bills, and New York moved on a generative AI warning bill and a RAISE Act amendment. With 78 chatbot bills active across 27 states, the federal government aims to simplify an evolving scenario, not a serene one. However, this introduces more uncertainty, short term. The framework is not law, it's a proposal. Congress might act on it, or not. If it does, expect a lengthy legislative process and likely court battles. If not, states continue their paths regardless. For now, organizations face the same challenge: comply with the strictest laws applicable, keeping a watchful eye on Washington as policies shift. To me, this isn't really a states versus Washington story, it's a convenience versus accountability story. One national rulebook sounds efficient, and for big companies it absolutely is, but it also makes it much easier to sand down the protections that states were using to pressure the market first. The liability section also matters. The framework opposes broad liability for AI companies. If Congress supports this, it might favor startups and investors, yet removes a key incentive for safety tests and bias checks, making trade-offs significant. Now let's revisit the Anthropic Pentagon story we've been tracking for a few weeks now, where the government labelled Anthropic a supply chain risk leading the company to court. Well, recent developments make the government's case publicly appear weaker than initially thought. On the 20th of March, Anthropic filed 2 sworn declarations in federal court in San Francisco as part of its reply brief. Sarah Heck, Anthropic's head of policy, and Thiago Ramasamy, the company's head of public sector, both pushed back on the Pentagon's narrative. Heck was in the room for the February meeting between Dario Amodei and Defense Secretary Hegseth. She emphatically stated that at no time did Anthropic imply or express desire for approval authority over military operations. That directly contradicts the government's core claim, and it matters because that claim is central to the case. Then there's an awkward timeline detail, first reported by TechCrunch. Court documents showed that on March 4th, one day after the Pentagon formally finalized its supply chain risk designation, Under Secretary Emil Michael emailed Amodei to say the two sides were very close on the exact issues now cited as national security threats: autonomous weapons and mass surveillance of Americans, publicly stating danger while privately suggesting alignment the day before. That's a question the government will need to answer. More complications came about when Axios reported that the Pentagon cited Anthropic's foreign workforce, including employees from China, as a security concern. Heck's declaration states this was never raised during months of negotiations. It appeared for the first time in the government's court filings. That matters on its own, but it also has broader implications. Foreign-born workers make up a significant share of top AI talent across the entire US industry. Anthropic headed to San Francisco Federal Court yesterday, 24th of March, before Judge Rita Lynn, and the hearing did not go well for the government. Within minutes, Lynn made her position clear. She described the government's actions as troubling and said they did not appear to be tailored to the stated national security concern. She identified 3 separate actions the administration had taken: Trump's ban on Anthropic across all federal agencies, Hegseth's requirement that Pentagon contractors cut commercial ties with the company, and the supply chain risk designation itself. Her view: if the real worry was about the integrity of the operational chain of command, the Pentagon could just stop using Claude. Instead, the government went much further than that. Then came the line that will likely define the coverage. Responding to an amicus brief that used the term attempted corporate murder, Lin said, and I quote, "I don't know if it's murder, but it looks like an attempt to cripple Anthropic." She went further, saying a specific concern was whether Anthropic was being punished for criticizing the government's contracting position in the press. That is a federal judge on record openly questioning whether this is First Amendment retaliation. Anthropic's lawyer, Michael Mongan, argued the government was using a flawed interpretation of procurement law to punish Anthropic for its negotiating stance. He pointed out this was the first time the supply chain risk designation had been used against an American company. It is a narrow authority, and he said it simply does not apply here. The government's lawyer, Eric Hamilton, pushed back. He argued that Anthropic had revealed itself to be an untrustworthy partner during negotiations, and that the Pentagon could not accept the risk going forward. His central argument, that Anthropic could theoretically push a software update that installs a kill switch or changes how Claude functions when warfighters need it most. That framing is important. The government's case rests not on something Anthropic has done, but on something it might hypothetically do in the future. There was also a revealing exchange about social media. Anthropic's position is that the status quo should be restored to February 26th, before Trump and Hegseth announced the blacklisting on social media. The government's lawyer argued those social media posts are not legally binding. Judge Lin called that argument pretty surprising, noting the posts are front and center in the entire lawsuit. The hearing lasted around 90 minutes. Lin did not rule from the bench. She asked both sides to file additional evidence by Wednesday and indicated she would issue a written ruling before the end of the week. So where does this leave us? The judge's language was unusually direct for a preliminary injunction hearing. She did not hide her skepticism of the government's position. That does not guarantee Anthropic wins. Courts do give the government significant deference on national security matters, and Hamilton leaned hard on that point. But the combination of the sworn declarations we talked about earlier, the timeline contradictions, the social media trail, and now a judge publicly questioning the government's motives. The momentum is clearly with Anthropic heading into this ruling. And there is a broader point here that goes beyond one company. If this designation stands, it sends a message to every AI company doing business with the government. Disagree on how your technology gets used, and you could be labeled a national security threat. That is a chilling precedent, and it is exactly why this case matters for the entire industry. We will be watching for Judge Lin's ruling later this week. I will cover it as soon as it drops. Continuing the infrastructure theme, Meta has signed yet another deal that might almost pass unnoticed simply due to the staggering nature of financial commitments these days. On the 16th of March, it agreed with Nebius to a deal potentially worth $27 billion over 5 years for AI computing capacity. The agreement guarantees $12 billion in dedicated capacity, with an additional $15 billion optional. Bloomberg described this as one of the initial, large-scale deployments of NVIDIA's Vera Rubin platform, with delivery commencing in early 2027. Nebius said it would provide compute capacity as part of its deal with Meta, including dedicated capacity and additional available compute. What matters here isn't the headline from NVIDIA. It's what Meta's signaling as a buyer. Lock in capacity years ahead and spread risk across suppliers. Moreover, it reveals Meta's strategy. Already committed to a $60 billion AMD deal and extensive internal plans, Meta now includes this arrangement centered on NVIDIA equipment. Meta hedging its investments across multiple suppliers isn't just prudent. It's the only sane response when this much capacity is riding on a handful of vendors. If one supplier slips, the whole roadmap gets exposed. According to Nebius and reporting on the matter, part of this setup extends beyond Meta, as Nebius plans on selling surplus capacity to other cloud clients. At such scales, vendor concentration stops being an abstract concern. It becomes a real operational risk. Nebius does warrant attention here as well, as it's transitioning into a substantial intermediary in the market. CNBC noted a similar $19 billion agreement with Microsoft last September, suggesting it's not luck. For organizations unable to match Meta's spending, this signals that accessing top-tier computing can't solely rely on hyperscalers. Right, so FedEx has done something interesting, and it's not interesting because a large company launched a training program. That happens all the time. It's interesting because of how they did it and what it tells us about where enterprise AI adoption is actually heading. In early December, FedEx announced an enterprise-wide AI education and literacy program covering its entire global workforce. We're talking about north of 400,000 people: package handlers, delivery drivers, customs clearance staff, data scientists, corporate teams. Everyone. They partnered with Accenture to deliver it through a platform called LearnVantage, and the training is role-based and personalized. So a warehouse worker gets different modules to a route optimization engineer, which frankly is the bare minimum you'd expect, but a lot of companies don't even get that far. What actually caught my attention was the C-suite commitment. Before any of this launched, every single FedEx executive took 2 full days out and flew to Silicon Valley. They ran what their chief digital officer, Vishal Talwar, described as a speed dating process with AI vendors to find the right partner. Talwar said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that he'd never seen an entire C-suite take 2 days off just to learn. And I believe that, because in most organizations, AI literacy is something the leadership team delegates. They approve the budget, they sign the internal comms, they do not sit in a room for 2 days evaluating options themselves. That matters, because the single biggest predictor of whether an AI program actually lands inside a company isn't the platform, it's not the curriculum, it's whether the leadership visibly participates. Now, the program itself has a few features worth noting. The curriculum updates monthly and quarterly. Talwar called it a living curriculum, which is important because AI moves fast enough that a static course written 6 months ago is already missing half the picture. They've also set up internal communities of practice. Data scientists across FedEx have already formed their own group to share use cases, and there are hackathons where teams compete to find new applications. So it's not just consume and certify, there's a social and practical layer to it. FedEx is also tracking progress through something they call AIQ, the AI quotient. But Talwar was careful to say they're measuring progress, not just success. His point was that it's very hard to attribute any specific business outcome purely to AI. That's a mature position. A lot of companies fall into the trap of trying to attach an ROI number to a literacy program 3 months in, and then abandoning it when the number isn't there. Now, beyond FedEx, what does this mean for the rest of us? First, the data point that should worry most businesses. Accenture's 2026 Pulse of Change report found that only around a quarter of organizations have embedded continuous AI learning. That's after 2 years of wall-to-wall AI hype. 3/4 of companies still haven't built this into the way their people work and develop. The gap between AI investment and AI readiness is enormous. Second, there's a pattern forming. Microsoft's Copilot rollout, Salesforce's Einstein training, and now FedEx. The companies that are getting serious about AI aren't just deploying tools. They're building organizational capability around those tools. Because the tools don't work if the people using them don't understand the basics. And third, the FedEx approach highlights something that I think most businesses get wrong. AI literacy isn't a one-off course. It's not a compliance tick box. It's a capability that has to be maintained and refreshed continuously. The technology changes every quarter. Your workforce's understanding has to keep pace. A training program you ran in January is already partly out of date by March. If you're not treating AI literacy as a living, evolving thing, you're building on sand. As a geopolitical angle to NVIDIA's week 2, Jensen Huang announced at GTC that NVIDIA is resuming production of H200 chips for China after a 10-month pause on advanced shipments. They've been authorized for a bunch of Chinese customers, purchase orders are in, and manufacturing has started back up. Sounds like a thaw. It's not. Look at the strings attached. The H200 is already a generation behind Blackwell and miles off Vera Rubin. It ships under US inspection, carries a 25% duty, and each Chinese customer is capped at 75,000 chips. The total numbers could still be meaningful, But this is controlled access, not open trade. The context matters here. AI and tech self-reliance is central to China's current plan, and local players kept building their own stuff during the freeze. But from what I've read, the H200 still outperforms what Chinese providers can typically offer for serious AI training runs. That said, the duty means Chinese compute costs end up higher than in the US. So the policy is adding friction on purpose. My read on this is it's a calculated move, preserve the training advantage at home while still selling into a massive market. NVIDIA gets the revenue back, China gets competent hardware, but nothing cutting edge. And Washington keeps the frontier without triggering a full embargo that could actually accelerate Chinese domestic alternatives. Now, let's quickly cover a few more topics before we wrap up. Encyclopedia Britannica and Merriam-Webster have sued OpenAI in Manhattan Federal Court. Copyright infringement is the core of it. They say OpenAI scraped nearly 100,000 of their web articles to train ChatGPT, and that the model can spit out full or partial verbatim copies of their content. That part is fairly standard at this point. We have seen this playbook from the New York Times and others. The interesting bit is the trademark claim. Britannica is arguing that when ChatGPT hallucinates and attributes made-up facts to Britannica, that is a violation of the Lanham Act. Basically, trademark infringement, not because OpenAI copied their work, but because the model is putting their name on things they never said. Those are two separate legal arguments targeting two different problems. Copyright covers the scraping and the reproduction. Trademark covers the false attribution. And that second one is the one to watch. If courts accept that hallucinated citations can constitute trademark infringement, it opens up a whole new front. Companies would not just be fighting over training data. They would be contesting what AI models say about them in their outputs. That is a much bigger surface area for litigation, and it could seriously change how these models handle sourcing and attribution. Next up, and this one is a big deal, Donald Knuth, 88 years old, arguably the most respected computer scientist alive, published a paper this week. He called it Claude Cycles, and he opened it with shock, shock. This is a man who gave up email in 1990 because he found it too distracting. He does not get excited easily. Here is what happened. Knuth had been stuck on a graph theory problem for weeks. His colleague Philip Stappers thought, let's just throw this at Claude. So he fed the exact problem to Anthropic's Claude Opus 4.6. In about an hour, across 31 attempts, Claude ground through it, tried things that failed, changed approach, hit dead ends, then found a technique that cracked it. Knuth took the output, verified it, wrote the formal proof, and then named his paper after the AI that solved it. His words, "It seems I'll have to revise my opinions about generative AI." From Knuth, that is like Gordon Ramsay admitting the microwave did it better. On the funding side, robotics had a massive week. Within days of each other, two major rounds landed. Mind Robotics, a Rivian spinout led by R.J. Scaringe, raised $500 million in a Series A, co-led by Axel and Andreessen Horowitz. Then Rhoda AI emerged from stealth with $450 million. That is nearly $1 billion into AI-driven robotics in a matter of days. What is interesting is the split. Mind is building tailored industrial robots for factory floors, not humanoids. Scaringe told the Wall Street Journal, and I love this quote, "Doing cartwheels does not create value in manufacturing." That is a direct shot at the humanoid hype. Rhoda is on the industrial side too, training foundation models on internet video to give robots real-world adaptability. But humanoid robotics is also pulling in serious money separately. Neuro Robotics is reportedly raising around $1.2 billion backed by Tether, which if it closes would push total humanoid robot funding past $3 billion for Q1 alone. So we are not watching one trend here. Industrial and humanoid robotics are both attracting major capital at the same time. And finally, there's xAI. Musk came out and said it wasn't built right the first time and needs rebuilding from the foundations up. That's a pretty bold admission when SpaceX is gearing up for what could be the biggest IPO in history. CNBC reported that co-founders keep leaving. Only 2 of the original 12 are still there. And all of this is happening while SpaceX is targeting a valuation of up to $1.75 trillion and looking to raise $50 billion. So xAI's problems aren't just Musk drama, they matter. His AI ambitions right now look less like momentum and more like a high-velocity rebuild with a very long queue of investors watching. That's all for this week's AI Roundup. If you found value in this breakdown, please leave a rating and hit subscribe. See you next week.